Tonight, we explore what happens when desire transforms into hunger, when admiration curdles into possession, when a house on a cliff becomes less a home and more a grave waiting to be filled. Before we begin, if stories that whisper rather than scream appeal to you, consider subscribing. It helps us craft more tales that linger long after the telling ends. Let me know in the comments where you are watching from and what time darkness finds you there. Now let me tell you about the house that Brandon Hale could not resist and the price he paid to make it his own. Brandon Hale first saw the Hartley house on a Tuesday in October, when the fog rolled thick off the Atlantic and the cliff edge disappeared into white nothing. He had not meant to stop. He was driving north, away from Boston, away from the divorce papers still warm from the printer, away from the architectural firm that had gently suggested he take an extended leave after the Riverside project collapsed. The GPS said 3 hours to Portland. He needed the distance, the motion, the illusion of escape. But then, he saw it. The house rose from the cliff like something carved from bone, Victorian Gothic with widow's walks and turrets that pierced the fog like accusations. It should not have been beautiful. It should have been grotesque, this ornate mansion perched on eroding stone, defying gravity and good sense. But Brandon understood immediately what most people could not see. It was perfect. Mathematically, architecturally, spiritually perfect. He pulled over without thinking, without planning, his hands moving before his mind could object. The realtor's sign tilted in the overgrown grass. Lost properties. Viewing by appointment. But there was a number, and Brandon found himself dialing before he could question why. She answered on the second ring. Her name was Diana Voss, and her voice carried the smooth certainty of someone who had sold many things to many desperate people. She could meet him there in 20 minutes, she said. The house had been on the market for 8 months. The owners were, she paused delicately, motivated. Brandon waited in his car, watching the house through the mist. Something about the windows bothered him. They were too dark. Not with curtains, but with an absence of light, as if the interior swallowed illumination rather than reflected it. The architecture was late 1800s, he estimated, with additions from the 20s and 50s, each renovation layered like scar tissue over the original structure. Diana arrived in a black sedan that seemed to materialize from the fog, rather than drive through it. She was older than her voice suggested, perhaps 60, with steel-gray hair pulled back so tightly it gave her face a skeletal quality. She wore expensive clothes that did not quite fit, as if she had recently lost weight or gained something else. She did not shake his hand. She simply smiled, gestured toward the house, and began walking. The path to the front door was slate, cracked and uneven, bordered by roses that had gone wild and thorny. The ocean sound was wrong here. Not the rhythmic crash of waves, but a constant low grinding, like teeth working at bone. Inside, the house smelled of salt and something medicinal. Something chemical trying to mask organic decay. The foyer was grand. Sweeping staircase, mahogany paneling, stained glass that caught no light. But the proportions were subtly off. The ceiling was too high. The corners did not quite meet at right angles. The floor tilted, just barely, toward the ocean. Brandon loved it immediately and completely. Diana watched him with an expression he could not name. Not quite satisfaction, not quite pity. Something between. She told him the history, as they walked through rooms that seemed to multiply, to fold into each other like origami made from Victorian excess. The house was built in 1887 by Jonathan Hartley, a shipping magnate who wanted to watch the ocean that had made him rich. It had passed through 4 families since then. The last owners, the Kimballs, had lived here for 6 years before listing it. She did not say why they were selling. She did not need to. Brandon found the geological survey report in a drawer in the study, left behind like a warning no one had bothered to hide. The cliff was eroding at 7 inches per year. Faster after storms. The house had maybe 15 years before the edge would claim it. Maybe 10. Maybe 5. That should have been enough. That should have been the end of it. But Brandon stood in the master bedroom, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the drop, and felt something shift inside him. A recognition. A hunger. He could save it. He could reinforce the foundation, redirect drainage, stabilize the cliff face. It would cost everything he had left, everything he could borrow, everything he could not afford to lose. But he could make it work. He had to make it work. Diana found him there, standing at the window, palms pressed against the glass. The asking price was $1.2 million, she said. Too much for what it was, too little for what it could be. The Kimballs would negotiate. They wanted out. Needed out. Brandon asked why. Diana's smile did not change, but something behind her eyes did. She told him the house had a history. Every house did. But this one, she paused. This one asks things of its owners. Small things at first. Then, larger ones. She did not elaborate. Brandon made an offer that afternoon. $800,000. Every dollar of his divorce settlement, every cent of his savings, every possibility of crawling back to normal life. The Kimballs countered. $1 million. Too high. Impossibly high. But Brandon drove home and looked at his empty apartment, his empty bank account, his empty future, and knew he would find a way. He always found a way. The research began innocently enough. Brandon needed to understand the house before he could save it. He spent hours in the county archives, pulling blueprints and permits, tracing the skeleton of the structure through time. But the blueprints kept changing. Rooms appeared and disappeared. Dimensions contradicted themselves. In one set of plans from 1923, there was a door on the second floor that led nowhere, just opened onto 40 feet of empty air above the rocks. The door was still there. Brandon had seen it. He started visiting the house at night, when Diana was not there to watch him with that knowing smile. He had a key now. She had given it to him after his second offer, $900,000, borrowed against a future he did not have. She said he should spend time there, get to know the house, see if it spoke to him. It did. The house spoke in creaks and groans, in temperature shifts and air pressure drops. It spoke in the way shadows fell wrong, the way sound traveled through walls that should have been solid, the way the ocean grinding on the rocks below sounded almost like words. Brandon began to dream about it. Not normal dreams. Architectural dreams. He saw how to save the cliff, how to pour concrete pylons deep into the bedrock, how to cantilever the structure over reinforced steel. He saw it so clearly it hurt. This future where the house stood forever, perfect and preserved and his. But first, he had to own it. The problem was money. He was $40,000 short, even with the predatory loan he had secured against his mother's house in Connecticut, even with the credit cards he had maxed, and the retirement account he had emptied. The Kimballs would not go lower. Diana had said as much. That was when Brandon started researching them. Robert and Patricia Kimball, late 50s. Successful enough to have bought the house 6 years ago, desperate enough to sell it now at a loss. Brandon found their social media, carefully curated photos of a life unraveling. Patricia's smile got thinner each year. Robert stopped appearing in photos entirely after year 4. Brandon found the police reports. 3 calls in 5 years. Disturbances. Possible intruder. Wellness check. Nothing official. Nothing criminal. Just, Diana's word came back to him, history. He found the death certificate for their daughter. Sarah Kimball. Age 7. Drowned in the bathtub. Accident. No charges filed. The house was empty when it happened. They were grocery shopping. She should not have been able to turn on the water by herself. The faucets were too stiff. Patricia told the police. They had been meaning to fix them. Brandon stopped sleeping. He started calculating instead. If something happened to the Kimballs, if something tragic forced a rushed sale, if the house acquired more history, darker history, fresher history, the price would drop. Properties with recent trauma sold for 30, sometimes 40% less. That was enough. That would be enough. He told himself he was just thinking, just exploring possibilities, just being thorough. He told himself that even as he studied the Kimballs' schedule, their habits, their patterns, even as he drove past their temporary apartment in town, the place they had fled to while the house sat empty and waiting, even as he researched cleaners that left no trace, methods that looked like accidents, timing that would give him plausible distance, the house whispered encouragement through his dreams. It showed him how, where, when. Brandon started buying supplies, thick plastic sheeting, industrial cleaner, a sledgehammer, because the Kimballs had a sledgehammer in their garage, and it would look like rage, like a botched robbery, like random violence instead of calculated necessity. He practiced. He measured. He planned. And on a Friday in November, when the fog rolled in thick enough to drown sound, when the Kimballs returned to the house one final time to retrieve boxes from the attic, Brandon was waiting. It was easier than he thought it would be. Robert died first. 3 blows, efficient and necessary. Patricia tried to run. She made it to the stairs before Brandon caught her. The sound was worse than he had imagined, that wet, heavy impact, but it faded quickly into the fog and the ocean grinding below. Brandon cleaned for 7 hours. He was thorough, methodical. The plastic sheeting contained everything. The cleaner erased everything else. He left nothing behind but absence, a void where 2 people had been, a silence that would be filled with police reports and investigations that would find nothing conclusive. He drove home at dawn, showered 3 times, burned his clothes in a dumpster behind a clothes factory, and waited. The call came 4 days later. Diana, her voice strange, almost excited. There had been a tragedy. The Kimballs, both dead. Murder-suicide, police suspected, or possibly a botched break-in. Terrible thing. Terrible. The estate would sell quickly now. 60% of asking. Maybe less. Did Brandon still want it? Brandon said yes before she finished asking. He moved in 3 weeks later. Cash sale, no inspection, no questions. The bank approved the loan instantly. Property with tragic history. Motivated estate. Good investment, they said, if you can stomach it. Brandon could stomach anything. He started renovations immediately. Ripped out carpets, repainted walls, replaced fixtures, tried to erase the Kimballs, to install himself in their place. He worked 18-hour days, alone, obsessive, possessed. But the house would not let him forget. The bloodstains returned, not where they had died, but everywhere else. Seeping up through floorboards he had replaced. Spreading across walls he had repainted. Dark and viscous and impossible. Brandon scrubbed and scrubbed, but they bloomed again each night like fungus, like guilt made visible. The dreams got worse. He walked through rooms that multiplied, that folded and unfolded like breathing organs. He opened doors that led to other doors. He climbed stairs that descended. And always, at the center, he found them. The Kimballs. Watching. Waiting. Mouths open in silent accusation. He found the geological report again, although he had burned it. The numbers had changed. 2 years. Maybe 1. Maybe months. The grinding sound from below grew louder. Brandon went to the edge one morning, looked down at the waves eating stone, and understood finally what the house had wanted all along. Not a owner. A offering? He tried to leave. Packed a bag. made it to the driveway, turned back. The house would not let him go. So, Brandon did the only thing left. He took the sledgehammer, the same one he had used on the Kimballs, and attacked the foundation. If the house wanted to fall, he would help it. If it wanted destruction, he would give it destruction. The first blow cracked concrete. The second opened a fissure. The third made the whole structure groan. Brandon kept swinging, laughing or crying. He could not tell any more until he heard it. That final, decisive crack. Not from his hammer. From below. From the cliff itself giving way. The house lurched, tilted, began its long slide into the ocean. Brandon had seconds to run. He did not run. He stood in the master bedroom, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the drop, palms pressed against the glass, and watched the rocks rush up to meet him. The house hit the water and came apart like something eager to dissolve, to return to the elements it had been resisting for too long. They found the Kimballs' bodies 3 days later, washed up on a beach 12 miles north. Identifiable by dental records. They never found Brandon. The property remained vacant, technically. Officially. The cliff edge was condemned, fenced off, marked with warnings. But sometimes, in heavy fog, drivers report seeing lights. A structure that should not be there, perched impossibly on stone that has long since fallen away. And sometimes, much rarer, someone goes missing. An architect. A developer. Someone who sees possibility where others see warning. Someone who wants. Who needs. Who cannot resist. The house is patient. The house is hungry. And the cliff edge is always waiting for the next offering. Because some foundations are built not on stone, but on the bodies of those who believed they could own what should never be possessed. And some houses do not need saving. They need feeding. And they will take whatever you give them, your money, your sanity, your life, until there is nothing left but absence and the sound of waves grinding on bone. What happens when the person you stop seeing decides you will finally look at them? Now let me tell you about the ride that Audrey Stratton wishes she had never accepted. Let me know in the comments where you are watching from, and what the current time is there. The parking lot was empty when Audrey Stratton turned the key and heard nothing but the tired click of a dead battery. She tried again, pumping the gas pedal the way her father had taught her decades ago. But the engine refused to wake. Rain drummed against the windshield in sheets, turning the October darkness into something solid, impenetrable, and for a moment she simply sat there, hands on the steering wheel, exhaling slowly into the cold. It was 8:47 in the evening, and she had stayed late grading essays, the way she always did on Thursdays, the way she had done for 11 years at Ridgefield High. The building behind her was dark now. All locked doors and motion sensor lights that had already forgotten she existed. She was alone. Completely alone. And her phone, sitting uselessly on the passenger seat, showed 1 bar of battery and no signal. She should have felt panic, but what arrived instead was exhaustion, a bone-deep weariness that made even fear seem like too much effort. She would call roadside assistance, wait in the car, survive the inconvenience. It was fine out. Everything was fine. That was when the headlights appeared. They came slowly, twin beams cutting through rain and darkness, sweeping across the empty faculty lot like searchlights. Audrey squinted, shielding her eyes, and watched as the vehicle rolled to a stop 20 feet away. Not a car. Bigger. Bulkier. The engine idled with a deep, mechanical rumble she recognized immediately. The door hissed open, and a figure stepped down into the rain, silhouetted against the interior lights. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a gray rain jacket with the hood pulled low. He walked toward her with an unhurried confidence, as if he had been expecting this, as if he had known exactly where she would be. Audrey rolled down her window halfway, just enough to speak. The rain spattered against her arm, cold and insistent. "Car trouble?" the man asked. His voice was calm, familiar in a way she could not immediately place. He pulled the hood back slightly, and the weak glow from the bus revealed his face. She had not seen him in 4 months. Not since the meeting, the one where she had sat across from the principal and the district supervisor and explained, as carefully as she could, what she had discovered. Cameras. Hidden cameras installed in the overhead compartments of Bus 47, angled to record the interior, the students, and her. Hours of footage. Weeks of surveillance. The district had acted swiftly, quietly, and Errol had been let go with severance pay and a non-disclosure agreement that kept everything buried. No charges filed. No public scandal. Just a quiet disappearance. And now he was here. "Mr. Vance," she said, keeping her voice steady. "I did not expect to see you." "Most people do not," he replied, and there was no bitterness in his tone, only a strange, flat observation. "Battery?" "I think so." He nodded slowly, as if confirming something to himself. "I can give you a ride. I live near your neighborhood. It is no trouble." Audrey hesitated, her hand still gripping the door handle. Every instinct told her to refuse, to say she would wait for a tow, to invent a friend who was already on the way. But the rain was getting heavier, the temperature dropping, and her phone was dying. And Errol Vance, standing in the downpour with water streaming off his jacket, looked exactly like what he had always been. Harmless. Invisible. Helpful. "All right," she heard herself say. "Thank you." He waited while she gathered her bag, locked her car, and hurried through the rain to the bus. The door was already open, the interior lights glowing pale yellow, and she climbed the steps quickly, shaking water from her hair. The smell hit her first. Pine sol and diesel, and something sharper, chemical, like industrial cleaner or disinfectant. The seats were empty, rows of them stretching back into shadow, and the vinyl upholstery gleamed wetly under the overhead lights, as if it had just been scrubbed. Errol climbed in behind her and closed the door with a mechanical hiss. The sound was too final, too deliberate, and Audrey felt something tighten in her chest. "You kept the bus," she said, trying to sound conversational as she moved toward the front seat behind the driver. "Bought it at an auction," he replied, settling into the driver's seat with practiced ease. "The district sold it for scrap value. Now it is just mine." He adjusted the mirrors, checked the gauges, and pulled the door release lever. The door sealed shut with a soft thunk, and the overhead lights dimmed slightly, as if the bus itself was settling into a different mode. Audrey sat down, her bag clutched on her lap, and watched as Errol shifted into gear. The bus rolled forward smoothly, tires hissing over wet pavement, and they left the parking lot behind. For the first few minutes, neither of them spoke. Audrey stared out the window, trying to orient herself. But the rain and darkness made it impossible to see more than vague shapes. Trees. Streetlights. The occasional glow of a distant house. She should have been home in 10 minutes. 15 at most. But then Errol turned left instead of right, and they were moving away from the main road, away from the neighborhoods she recognized. "Mr. Vance," she said carefully, "you missed the turn." "No," he said, his voice still calm, still measured. "We are taking the long way tonight, Miss Stratton. The hollow route." And that was when she heard it, the soft, mechanical click of the door, locks engaging. The bus moved through darkness like a thing divorced from geography, its headlights carving tunnels through rain that seemed endless, infinite, and Audrey could no longer tell how long they had been driving. 20 minutes. An hour. Time folded in on itself, became slippery, unreliable, and the only constants were the hum of the engine and the rhythmic sweep of the windshield wipers. She had tried the door handle. Locks. She had tried reasoning. "Mr. Vance, please, just take me home." No response. She had tried anger. You cannot do this. This is kidnapping. He had only adjusted the rearview mirror and kept driving. Now she sat in the fourth row, no longer pretending this was a ride home, and watched as Errol finally pulled the bus onto a narrow, unpaved road that disappeared into dense forest. Branches scraped against the sides of the bus, a sound like fingernails on metal, and the headlights illuminated nothing but rain and trees and more darkness. They stopped in a clearing that should not have existed, a wide expanse of gravel surrounded by pines so tall they vanished into the low-hanging clouds. Errol turned off the headlights but left the engine idling, a low, constant rumble that vibrated through the floor. Then he stood, turned, and walked down the aisle toward her. Audrey pressed herself against the window, her breath coming fast and shallow, but Errol did not approach with violence. He simply sat down across the aisle, 3 rows back, and looked at her with an expression she could not read. Calm. Sad. Tired. I want you to understand something, he said, and his voice was still gentle, still measured, as if they were having a conversation over coffee. I spent 6 months after they let me go trying to figure out what I had done wrong. 6 months alone in this bus, driving it out here every night, trying to understand why all of you, had stopped seeing me. Audrey swallowed hard. You installed cameras. You were filming students without consent. You were filming me. I was observing, he corrected, not defensively, but as if the distinction mattered deeply to him. I was trying to understand why I had become invisible. Do you know what it is like, Miss Stratton, to exist in a space where no one acknowledges you? Where you are furniture, a function, a thing that drives the bus and nothing more. That does not give you the right to... I am not talking about rights, he interrupted, and for the first time there was an edge to his voice, sharp and brittle. I am talking about existence. I am talking about what happens when a person is erased so completely that they forget they were ever real. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a tablet, its screen glowing pale blue in the darkness. He turned it toward her, and Audrey saw herself. Classroom footage, hallway footage, her standing at the front of the bus, giving directions to students, her laughing with a colleague, her grading papers in her car. Months of footage, hundreds of hours. You never saw me, he said quietly. Not once. Not until you found the cameras. And even then, you did not see me. You saw a problem, a liability, something to be quietly removed. Audrey felt something cold and sick coiling in her stomach. Mr. Vance, I am sorry you felt invisible, but what you did was wrong. It was illegal. They paid me $38,000 to disappear, he continued, as if she had not spoken. Severance fee. Hush money. They gave me cash to become a ghost. And I used it to buy this bus, and I spent 6 months documenting what happens when someone is completely alone. Do you know what I found? He leaned forward, his eyes reflecting the tablet's glow. I found that isolation is not silence. It is noise. Endless, maddening noise inside your own head. I found that when you have no one to reflect yourself back to you, you start to fragment. Your thoughts spiral. Your sense of time collapses. You begin to hallucinate meaning where there is none. You become obsessed with the one thing you cannot have. Recognition. Audrey's hands were shaking. What do you want from me? I want you to see me, he said simply. Not as a problem. Not as a threat. As a person. As someone who existed before you erased him. The rain hammered against the roof, a sound like static, and Audrey realized with creeping horror that he was not going to hurt her. Not physically. This was something worse. This was forced witnessing. This was a confession disguised as an interrogation. We are going to stay here, Errol said, settling back into his seat, until you understand what you did when you stopped seeing me as human. However long that takes. And the bus, sealed and soundproofed and isolated in the middle of nowhere, became a tomb. A confessional. A chamber where time moved differently, and the only sounds were breathing and rain, and the low, unending rumble of the engine. Hours passed, or what felt like hours, and Audrey moved through stages of response the way a drowning person moves through water. Denial. Anger. Bargaining. She tried everything. She screamed. She reasoned. She begged. She appealed to his humanity, his logic, his conscience. Errol sat across the aisle, patient and immovable, and spoke in long measured paragraphs about invisibility, about systemic erasure, about the psychological architecture of being unseen. He showed her more footage, not just of herself, but of other staff members who had dismissed him, students who had looked through him, administrators who had referred to him only by his function. "The district has done this before," he said at one point, pulling out a file folder filled with documents. "Other employees, quietly removed, paid off, disappeared. I found the records. I am not the first. I'm just the first who refused to stay gone." Audrey stared at the papers, her vision blurring with exhaustion. She could see names, dates, settlements, a pattern, a history, and she felt something shift inside her. Something unwilling and unwanted. Understanding. Not forgiveness. Not absolution. But recognition. "I see you," she whispered finally, her voice hoarse. "Earl, Vance, you are real. You are real." He looked at her for a long time, his expression unreadable. Then he nodded slowly. "Do you?" "Yes." "Do you understand what erasure feels like?" "Yes." "Do you understand that being invisible is not the same as being gone?" "Yes." He stood, walked to the front of the bus, and turned off the engine. The sudden silence was deafening, a void that pressed against her eardrums. He opened the door, and cold, rain-soaked air rushed in. "You can go now," he said quietly. "You have seen what needed to be seen." Audrey did not move at first, too exhausted, too disoriented to process what was happening. Then, slowly, she stood, her legs trembling, and walked down the aisle. She paused at the door, looking back at him. "Why?" she asked. "Why let me go?" He smiled, a strange, sad expression. "Because recognition is not forgiveness, Miss Stratton. It is only the first phase of the experiment." She stumbled down the steps into rain and darkness, her feet slipping on wet gravel. She ran, fell, crawled, ran again, moving through forest that seemed endless until finally, she reached a road. Headlights. A trucker who stopped, who called the police, who wrapped her in a blanket and asked what had happened. She tried to explain, but the words came out wrong, fragmented, incoherent. The police found nothing. No bus at the quarry. No evidence of Errol Vance. The surveillance footage from the school had been corrupted, erased, as if it had never existed. The district denied that Errol had been employed for more than 2 weeks, claimed there had been no severance, no settlement, no hidden cameras. Audrey's testimony was noted, filed, and quietly dismissed as trauma response, exposure-induced confusion, a psychological break triggered by stress and hypothermia. She was encouraged to seek counseling, take medical leave, consider a career change. She left teaching 3 months later. She moved to a different town, rented a small apartment, took a job that required no human interaction. She could not ride buses anymore. Could not even look at them without feeling her chest tighten, her breathing shallow. 6 months after that night, a package arrived at her door. No return address. Inside was a thumb drive labeled in precise, familiar handwriting. The Hollow Root Study, Subject 1. She plugged it into her laptop with shaking hands. The footage began with her in the bus, exhausted, terrified, weeping. It showed hours of conversation, her denials, her anger, her final, broken recognition. But it did not end there. It continued. Other teachers, other years, other subjects, all sitting in that same bus, all undergoing the same process. And in the final frame, Errol Vance sat in the driver's seat, looking directly at the camera, his expression calm, his eyes hollow. A single line of text appeared beneath his face. Recognition does not end the experiment. It only completes the first phase. Audrey closed the laptop, her hands numb, her mind blank. She had learned, too late, that being invisible is not the same as being gone. She had learned that some people, when erased long enough, do not return for vengeance. They return for testimony, for documentation, for proof that they existed. And the scariest monsters, she now understood, are not the ones we see. They are the ones we trained ourselves not to notice, until they decided with calm and terrible patience to be seen. She never opened the thumb drive again. But sometimes, late at night, she heard the sound of air brakes hissing, the rumble of a diesel engine, the mechanical click of door locks engaging. And she knew with absolute certainty that somewhere out there, the hollow route was still running, still collecting subjects, still documenting what happens when erasure becomes unbearable, still waiting for the next person who needed to learn how to see. Tonight, we explore what happens when desperation wears perfume, and revenge is inherited like heirloom jewelry. Before we begin, I am curious who listens to these stories in daylight, and who waits for darkness. Now, let me tell you about Isabella Valdez, and the perfume that made her beautiful again, the perfume that made her unforgettable, the perfume that ensured no one would ever come close to her again. Isabella Valdez sat at her vanity in the atelier, 53 years old and disappearing. Not physically, not yet, but in the ways that mattered. In the way Javier no longer looked at her when she entered a room. In the way clients requested Celine now, the apprentice with smooth hands and unlined eyes. In the way mirrors had become adversaries, reflecting a woman she no longer recognized, a woman whose youth had not left gracefully, but instead had fled like a guest escaping a dull party. The atelier smelled of bergamot and vetiver, of decades of her work crystallized into bottles that lined the walls like trophies. But lately, beneath the perfume, Isabella detected something else. Something sour and organic, the scent of her own obsolescence. She watched Celine through the studio window, 26 years old and luminous, laughing at something Javier said. Her Javier, her collaborator of 15 years, her lover of 12. He touched Celine's shoulder, just briefly, just enough. Isabella felt something crack inside her chest, small and clean, like the sound of good crystal beginning to fracture. That night, as she locked the atelier doors, she found the woman waiting on the street. Tall, silver-haired, severe as winter. The woman stood beneath the lamplight wearing a coat that looked expensive in a way that suggested old money. Very old money. The kind that carried its own weight and history. She held a small black box tied with white silk. Isabella Valdez, the woman said, her voice smooth, deliberate, like honey poured over glass. Master perfumer, creator of midnight jasmine, ember, and ash, the widow's veil. Isabella stopped, keys cold in her hand. You know my work. I know more than your work. The woman stepped closer, and Isabella caught her scent. Rain on stone, something mineral and ancient. I know what you are losing. I know what you want back. The street was empty, the hour late, but Isabella did not feel afraid. Instead, she felt seen, and that was somehow worse, somehow more dangerous. My name is Ilara, the woman continued, extending the black box. And I have something for you, something that will make you irresistible again, something that will return what time has stolen. Isabella should have walked away. Every instinct, every rational thought, screamed to refuse. But her hands, her traitor hands, reached for the box anyway. Inside, nestled in black velvet, sat a crystal bottle. The perfume within was amber, dark and luminous, like captured sunlight gone to rot. No label. No ingredients list. Just liquid promise. Essence bloom, Alara said. It will give you everything you have lost, your beauty, your power, your place in the world. But I must warn you, it distills truth, dangerous truth. Truth that cannot be contained once released. Isabella lifted the bottle, removed the stopper. The scent was extraordinary, roses and smoke, honey and copper, something floral dying into something feral. It smelled like youth remembered through the lens of regret. It smelled like everything she wanted. What is the price? Isabella asked, because everything had a price, especially miracles. Alara smiled, cold and patient. The price is already paid, Isabella, long ago, by someone you have forgotten. Isabella did not understand, but she did not care. She pressed the stopper back into place, held the bottle against her chest, like a talisman. Use it wisely, Alara said, already turning to leave. Or do not use it wisely. The results will be the same. Then she was gone, dissolving into the Parisian night, and Isabella stood alone beneath the lamplight, holding her salvation in her hands. She applied the perfume that night, 3 drops behind each ear, 1 at the hollow of her throat. The scent bloomed against her skin, evolved, deepened, became something intimate and alive. She looked in the mirror and saw nothing different, not yet. But when she woke the next morning, everything had changed. Her skin, tighter. Her eyes, brighter. The lines around her mouth, softened into suggestions rather than declarations. She looked 35, perhaps younger. She looked like a woman who still had time, who still had choices. And when Javier arrived at the atelier that afternoon, he stopped in the doorway and stared. "Isabella," he breathed, and his voice carried something she had not heard in years. Hunger, wonder, fear. "What have you done?" She smiled, applied more perfume, watched him lean closer like a man drawn to flame. "I have simply remembered who I am," she said. The transformation was not merely physical, it was atmospheric, architectural, complete. Within a week, clients who had forgotten her name were requesting her exclusively. Celine found herself relegated to assistant work, her luminosity dimmed by Isabella's rekindled brilliance. And Javier returned to Isabella's bed, to her side, to her orbit, as if the past months of wandering had been merely a bad dream. But beneath the triumph, wrongness accumulated. The perfume had to be reapplied constantly, every 6 hours, sometimes less. If Isabella waited too long, her reflection would flicker, momentarily showing the woman she had been, the woman she was, before snapping back to the illusion. And the scent itself? It grew heavier, more insistent, less floral and more chemical, less beauty and more necessity. She ignored it. She had been gifted a miracle. She would not question its mechanics. Isabella decided to host a dinner party, a launch event for her new signature fragrance, a perfume she had been developing for months, her masterwork, her legacy. She invited 20 guests, critics, collectors, rivals, everyone who had whispered about her decline, everyone who had counted her out. The invitations went out on cream cardstock, elegant script promising an evening of revelation. Celine helped prepare the atelier, arranging tables, polishing glassware, her movements quiet and resentful. Isabella watched her and felt something like pity, something like vindication. "You will understand one day," Isabella said, not unkindly, "what it means to be replaced, to watch everything you have built be given to someone younger, someone lesser. You will understand, and you will do what I have done." Celine said nothing, but her hands trembled as she set down the wine glasses. The night of the party arrived cool and clear. the kind of Parisian evening that smelled like possibility. Guests arrived in silk and cashmere, air-kissing cheeks, murmuring compliments that sounded sincere because they were. Isabella moved among them like a queen returned from exile, radiant and untouchable. Javier stood at her side, his hand possessive on her waist, and Isabella felt complete, restored, victorious. She had applied the perfume generously that evening, wanting to ensure its full effect. The scent filled the atelier, rich and cloying, beautiful, and wrong. Some guests remarked on it, asked what it was, but Isabella only smiled and promised revelation. Dinner was served, courses appeared and disappeared, wine flowed, laughter rose like smoke. Isabella stood to make her toast, to unveil her new fragrance, to claim her place once more in the world that had tried to forget her. She lifted her glass, and the room fell silent. To beauty, she began. To resilience, to refusing to fade quietly. The guests echoed her, drank, and then something shifted. One of the critics, a woman named Margot, set down her glass with a trembling hand. Her face had gone pale, almost gray. "I plagiarized my first book," Margot said suddenly, her voice flat, mechanical, as if the words were being pulled from her throat by invisible hooks. "I stole it from a student who died before she could publish. I have built my entire career on her corpse." The table went silent. Another guest, a collector, began to weep. "I'm only here because my father bought his reputation, because we have lied about our lineage for 3 generations. We are not nobles. We are farmers who stole a name and buried the evidence." Isabella felt her smile freeze. Something was terribly, monstrously wrong. "I embezzle from my clients," a gallery owner whispered. "I abandoned my daughter when she was 6, a perfumer confessed. I watch people through their windows. I have done it for years." The confessions cascaded, unstoppable, horrifying, each guest compelled to vomit their darkest truths into the candlelit dahlia. Some fell to their knees. Some covered their mouths, but the words came anyway, muffled and desperate. And then Javier spoke. His voice was hollow, emptied out. "I abandoned my first wife when she was pregnant. I left her with nothing, and told her the child was not mine. I have a daughter I have never met, a daughter whose name I do not know. I am a coward, and I have always been a coward." Isabella turned to him, numb, disbelieving. "Her name is Ilara," a new voice said from the doorway. The silver-haired woman stood framed in the entrance, perfectly calm, perfectly still. She smiled, and it was the smile of someone who had waited decades for this moment. "Hello, Father," Ilara said, her voice silk over shattered glass. "Hello, Isabella." The atelier fell into absolute silence. Ilara walked into the room slowly, deliberately, as if savoring each step. "My grandmother was Marielle Rousseau," she said, addressing the room but watching only Isabella to right. "A perfumer of extraordinary talent, extraordinary vision. She created formulas that revolutionized the industry, scents that should have made her legendary." Isabella felt the floor tilt beneath her. "But Isabella Valdez stole them," Ilara continued. "She worked as my grandmother's assistant, and when my grandmother fell ill, when dementia began to claim her memory, Isabella took her notebooks, her formulas, her life's work, and claimed it as her own." "No," Isabella whispered, but the word had no weight, no conviction. "Midnight Jasmine was my grandmother's," Ilara said. "Ember and Ash was my grandmother's. The widow's veil, the perfume that made you famous, that was my grandmother's grief for my grandfather, crystallized into scent. You built your empire on her stolen genius." The guests stared, unable to move, unable to speak, still gripped by the perfume's compulsion. "And my father," Ilara turned to Javier, "abandoned her when she needed him most, left her pregnant and penniless. She died when I was 15, and with her final breath, she told me 2 names, Javier Morales and Isabella Valdez. She told me to remember. She told me to wait." Isabella tried to step back, but her legs would not obey. The perfume was still working, still compelling. So I waited, Alara said. I found Celine, my grandmother's blood through a cousin's line, and I trained her, shaped her, sent her to you as an apprentice, an instrument, a knife. I watched her charm Javier, watched him prove he was still the same weak man who abandoned my mother. And then I came to you, Isabella, with a gift. She gestured to the perfume bottle on the table, still half full, still radiating that sickly amber glow. Essence Bloom is my creation, Alara said. Part perfume, part truth serum, part curse. It distills secrets, forces confession, bonds them to the wearer's very scent. You wanted to be irresistible, Isabella. Congratulations, you are unforgettable, but not in the way you imagined. Isabella looked at her hands, her beautiful, youthful hands, and smelled herself, truly smelled herself for the first time. Beneath the flowers, beneath the beauty, there was rot. There was theft. There was every lie she had ever told crystallized into aromatic form, and it would never wash away, never fade, never release her. The perfume bonded with your skin 3 days ago, Alara said, almost gently. It is permanent now, cellular, eternal. You will be beautiful, but everyone who comes near you will smell your sins, your thefts, your betrayals. They will know what you are without you saying a word. You will be stunning and alone, admired from a distance and reviled up close. Isabella tried to speak but vomited instead, confession pouring from her in waves. I stole everything. I forged documents. I bribed officials. I destroyed competitors. I seduced married men for contracts. I lied about my past, my training, my very name. I am not who anyone thinks I am. I am a thief, and I am empty, and I have always been empty. The words kept coming, unstoppable, and with each confession the room grew colder, the guests more horrified. When Isabella finally stopped, gasping, Alara was already at the door. The atelier belongs to my family now, she said. The formulas you stole, I have reclaimed. Celine will run it under the Rousseau name, as it should have been from the beginning. You, Isabella, you can keep your beauty, your youth, your perfect face. Consider it my gift and my grandmother's revenge. Then she was gone, and the dinner guests fled, stumbling over each other in their desperation to escape, to distance themselves from the horror they had witnessed, the horror they had confessed. Javier remained, standing frozen, staring at Isabella as if seeing her for the first time, and perhaps he was. I am sorry, he whispered, but Isabella did not know if he was apologizing to her or to the daughter he had never known. Then he left too, and Isabella stood alone in her atelier, surrounded by broken crystal and spilled wine, drowning in the scent of her own ruined soul. Isabella Valdez still lives in Paris, though she moved from her Elia to a small apartment far from the arrondissement where she once reigned. She is still beautiful, still youthful, still radiant in the way that makes strangers stop and stare. But they never come closer, they never approach. Because up close, the scent is unmistakable, undeniable. The smell of someone who took everything and gave nothing, the smell of a life built on stolen ground. She tried to wash it away, tried solvents and soaps and chemical peels that left her skin raw and bleeding. But the perfume remained, fused to her at the molecular level, a brand that could not be erased. She sees Javier sometimes from a distance. He walks with Alara now, trying to build something resembling a relationship with the daughter he abandoned. He looks older, grayer, diminished, but he looks real. Isabella looks immortal, and she has never been more alone. Late at night, when the city sleeps, she stands at her window and wonders if this is what she truly wanted all along. To be unforgettable, to leave a mark that could never be erased, to be remembered not for her talent, but for her hunger, not for what she created, but for what she stole. The perfume industry moved on without her. The Rousseau name rose again, helmed by Celine, and blessed by Elara's ruthless business acumen. They create scents that celebrate authenticity, that reject theft and vanity, that honor the grandmother whose work was nearly lost to greed. And Isabella Valdez, master perfumer, thief, cautionary tale, she remains beautiful and damned. A woman who wanted so desperately to be seen that she became impossible to ignore and unbearable to witness, because some hungers cannot be satisfied, only transformed into curses. And some revenge is not a moment, but a legacy, passed down like heirloom jewelry, waiting for the right hand to wield it. We are told that beauty is power, but what if power is simply the thing that remains when everything else has been stripped away, when even your reflection cannot lie for you anymore? Isabella learned that vanity is not a sin of excess, but of absence, the desperate attempt to fill a void that cannot be filled, a hunger that only grows deeper with each attempt to feed it. She wanted to be unforgettable. She succeeded. And now she will never ever be free. We explore what happens when desperation meets an offer too perfect to refuse, when vanity becomes a doorway to something ancient and hungry. I am curious how many of you are listening to this alone, in the quiet hours. Now, let me tell you about the scent that Diane Ashford wishes she had never accepted, and the confessions she wishes she had never heard. Diane Ashford arrived at her mountain laboratory 3 hours before dawn, when the November cold had already settled into the bones of the valley below. The workshop smelled like bergamot and failure, like 2 decades of formulas that once made her name legendary and now barely paid the rent. She was 47 years old, and the mirror had become her cruelest critic. The email had arrived at midnight, unsigned, impossibly formal. It offered her something she thought no longer existed, a commission, a real one, from a client willing to pay what her work used to command. All they wanted was a consultation, a single meeting, and discretion. The coordinates led here, to her own studio, as if they had known exactly where to find her, as if they had been watching for some time. She unlocked the door slowly, carefully, and the hinges groaned in the cold. Inside, the shadows were thick, oppressive, and she could see her breath in the air. The heating had failed again, or perhaps she had forgotten to pay the bill. The thought made her throat tighten. She had forgotten so many things lately: deadlines, invoices, the names of suppliers who no longer returned her calls. On the workbench, where no package should have been, sat a wooden box. It was small, ancient-looking, carved from something dark and heavy. No note, no return address, just the box, and the faint smell that rose from it. A smell she could not name. Something organic, something cold, something that reminded her of pine needles and formaldehyde in the air before a storm. She opened it with trembling hands, and inside, nestled in black silk, was a single vial. The liquid was clear, almost luminous, and when she held it to the light, it refracted in ways that glass should not allow. Beautiful, wrong, impossible. Beside it, a card, handwritten in ink that looked rust-brown, nearly copper. Use sparingly. Restoration requires sacrifice. The debt is collected in truth. She should have closed the box. She should have called someone, anyone, reported the intrusion, the strangeness, the way the scent made her think of graves and snow and things frozen in waiting. But Diane Ashford had not built a career by fearing the unfamiliar. She had built it by transforming the unknown into something people would pay to wear, to own, to breathe. And she was so tired of fading. She applied a single drop to her wrist, just below the pulse point, where the skin was thin and the blood ran close to the surface. The scent bloomed immediately, filled the room, filled her lungs, and for a moment she could not breathe. It smelled like winter, like the moment before an avalanche, like something waiting beneath the ice. And beneath that, faint but unmistakable, It smelled like time running backward. Her reflection in the darkened window shifted, softened, and she saw herself as she had been 10 years ago, 15, 20. The lines around her eyes smoothed, her jaw tightened, her hands, God, her hands looked young again. She laughed, breathless and disbelieving, and the sound echoed strangely in the empty lab. She did not notice the cold deepening. She did not notice the frost forming on the windows, spreading in patterns that looked almost like handwriting. She did not notice the faint sound beneath the silence, a low, rhythmic scratching, like nails on glass, like something trying to get out or in. By the time she did notice, it was already too late. The first confession came 3 hours later. Diane had gone into town for supplies, riding the euphoria of her transformation like a drug. People stared, not because they recognized her, but because they did not, because she looked like a stranger wearing a younger woman's skin. She felt powerful, untouchable, as if she had cheated something fundamental and gotten away with it. She stopped at the general store, the only one still open this early, and the owner, Marcus Chen, a man she had known for 15 years, looked at her strangely. He opened his mouth to speak, to ask if he could help her, and instead he vomited words. "I had been stealing from the register for 2 years, he said, and his voice was flat, mechanical, as if something else was speaking through him. "I have been stealing because my daughter needs surgery, and I cannot afford it, and I am too proud to ask for help, and I think about killing myself every morning when I open the shop." He staggered backward, gasping, clutching his throat as if the words had been dragged out of him by force. Diane stood frozen, horrified, unable to respond, and Marcus stared at her with wide, wet eyes, betrayed and terrified. "What did you do to me?" he whispered. She fled, but the confessions followed her. At the post office, the clerk admitted to reading other people's mail, to searching for secrets, to fantasizing about disappearing and never coming back. At the cafe, a woman Diane barely knew confessed to poisoning her neighbor's dog because it barked too much, because she hated the sound of life continuing around her when her own felt so empty. Every person who came within 10 feet of Diane began to speak, to purge, to bleed truth like an open wound. And she realized, with cold, creeping certainty, that it was the scent. It clung to her like a second skin, invisible but undeniable. And wherever she went it spread, infected, demanded honesty. She tried to wash it off, scrubbing her wrists until the skin was raw. But the scent remained, embedded in her pores, in her breath, in the air around her. She was the source, the carrier, the catalyst. By nightfall, the storm had arrived. Snow fell in thick, heavy sheets, the kind that buried roads and severed phone lines, and made the mountain town feel like the last place on earth. The wind howled through the valley, shaking the windows of her lab, and Diane locked herself inside, alone, shaking, trying to understand what she had done. The box sat on the workbench, still open, still waiting. She approached it slowly, carefully, and this time she saw the inscription carved into the lid, words she had missed before, worn smooth by age and handling. The frozen do not lie. They wait, and they remember, and they speak when called. She turned the vial over in her hands, and at the bottom, etched in letters almost too small to read, was a date. February 23rd, 1910. The same date as the Wellington avalanche, the disaster she had read about years ago, the train buried beneath tons of snow and ice, the passengers frozen in their final moments. Her breath caught. The scent was not synthetic. It was not botanical. It was extracted from something dead, something preserved, something that had been waiting beneath the ice for over a century. And now it was inside her, rewriting her cells, restoring her youth by feeding on the confessions it harvested, by consuming the truth of everyone around her. She heard the scratching again, louder now, coming from the walls, from the ceiling, from beneath the floorboards. And this time she recognized it for what it was. Not mice, not wind, but voices, dozens of them, whispering, pleading, confessing. The frozen people were waking, and they were hungry. The knocking began at 2 in the morning. Diane had barricaded herself in the lab, piling furniture against the door, sealing the windows, but it did not matter. They came anyway, drawn by the scent, compelled by something older than reason. She heard footsteps crunching through the snow, slow and deliberate, and when she looked through the frost-covered glass she saw them. Marcus from the store, the postal clerk, the woman from the cafe, all of them standing in the storm, staring at the building with empty, hollow eyes. Their mouths moved, forming words she could not hear, confessions that never stopped. And their skin, God, their skin looked wrong, too pale, too smooth, as if they were freezing from the inside out. She realized, with sick, dawning horror, that she was doing this to them. The scent was not just forcing confessions. It was harvesting them, draining the warmth and life from everyone it touched, feeding on their secrets to sustain her impossible youth. She was becoming a parasite, a predator, a thing that consumed truth and left only frozen husks behind. She grabbed the vial, intending to destroy it, to smash it against the floor, but her hands would not obey. They moved on their own, unscrewing the cap, lifting the glass to her lips. She tried to scream, to resist, but the scent filled her lungs and she drank. The transformation was immediate. Her reflection in the window changed, shifted, and she saw herself as she truly was now. Not young, not restored, but something else. Something translucent and cold and wrong. Her skin glowed faintly, like ice lit from within, and when she opened her mouth to speak, frost formed on her lips. She understood then. The people outside were not coming to harm her. They were coming to join her. The scent had marked them, claimed them, and now they would become like her, frozen confessors, vessels for the truths they could no longer contain. And somewhere, in some other mountain town, another desperate person would receive a box, would open it, would apply the scent and begin the cycle again. The door splintered inward, and they entered, one by one, silent and patient and inevitable. Diane tried to run, but her legs were too cold, too heavy, and when she looked down, she saw frost spreading across her skin, creeping up her ankles, her calves, her thighs. The last thing she heard before the ice took her was Marcus whispering, his voice distant and echoing, as if it came from the bottom of a frozen lake. "We do not lie anymore," he said. "We only wait, and remember, and speak when called." And then there was nothing but cold. They found Diane's lab 3 weeks later, when the storm had finally cleared and the roads were passable again. The building was empty, abandoned, the workbench covered in frost. The only evidence she had been there at all was a single vial, empty, sitting in an open wooden box. The box was sent to a university for analysis, catalogued as a historical artifact, and eventually sold at auction to a private collector. The vial was cleaned, refilled with something harmless, and displayed in a glass case alongside other curiosities. But sometimes, late at night, when the museum is empty and the heating fails, security guards report a strange smell drifting through the halls. Pine needles and formaldehyde, copper and cold, and something organic, something that makes them think of graves and snow and things waiting beneath the ice. And sometimes they feel the urge to speak, to confess things they have never told anyone, secrets they did not know they carried. But they swallow the words, lock them away, and tell themselves it is just the cold. Just the cold. Diane Ashford was never found. Her name appears occasionally in missing persons databases, cross-referenced with avalanche zones and mountain disappearances, but no body was ever recovered. Some locals claim they see her sometimes, walking through the forest during winter storms, translucent and glowing, followed by others who move with the same slow, inevitable patience. They do not speak. They only wait. And if you are ever offered a scent that promises restoration, That smells like winter, and lost time, and things frozen in waiting. Remember this, some debts are paid in truth, and some truths are too cold to survive. Fear is not always a warning. Sometimes it is a harvest. And some harvests never end. They simply find new fields to reap. What happens when a gift of sight brings visions no one should see? Are you alone? Good. Now, let me tell you about the woman who received someone else's eyes, and the curse that came with them. Chloe Hartley woke to light for the first time in 2 years, and with it came the shadows. The recovery room was too bright, sterile in that specific hospital way that smelled like antiseptic, trying to mask something organic beneath. She blinked, slowly, carefully. The new cornea still foreign in her skull, still learning how to translate the world. Her surgeon stood at the foot of the bed, smiling, triumphant. He spoke about success rates, integration, how lucky she was. But Chloe was not listening. She was watching the thing standing behind him. It was translucent, hollow where its eye should have been, and it stood too close to the nurse adjusting the IV drip. The figure did not move, did not breathe. It simply waited. Chloe opened her mouth to speak, to ask, but the words felt thick, wrong. And then she heard it. A metallic screech, like nails dragged across railroad tracks, distant but growing closer. The temperature dropped. She could see her breath. The nurse looked up, frowned, said something about the thermostat. No one else seemed to notice. The figure turned its head toward Chloe slowly, deliberately. It had no face, but she felt it looking. Then it was gone. The nurse died 6 hours later. Car accident, they said. Sudden, unexpected, no explanation for why she swerved off the bridge. Chloe heard about it from another patient. Whispered in the hallway. Tragic, so young, such a waste. She said nothing. She could not explain what she had seen. She could not explain that she had known. Before the accident, before the 2 years of blindness, Chloe had been a photographer. She had built her life on capturing light, on freezing moments before they disappeared. The chemical explosion had stolen that, scorched her corneas, left her in darkness. The transplant was supposed to be a resurrection, a return to the world she loved. Instead, it gave her something else. Something she had not asked for. Something that had belonged to someone else. She researched her donor that night, hands trembling as she navigated the organ registry databases, following threads that should have been anonymous, but were not if you knew how to look. The name appeared after 20 minutes of searching, Vera Walsh. Age 41. Cause of death, stroke. No next of kin. No ceremony. No mourning. But there was more. Vera Walsh had lived in a dying industrial town 3 hours north, a place where the factories had closed decades ago and left only rust and resentment behind. The local archives, digitized poorly and scattered across county websites, told a story Chloe wished she had not found. Vera had been shunned, they said. Crazy Vera, who claimed she could see death coming. Who warned people. Who was right, again and again, until no one wanted to be near her anymore. Until her father died in a factory accident she had predicted, but could not stop. Until they locked her away. Chloe sat in the dark of her apartment, the lights off because she could not stand to see if the shadows would return. She thought about Vera, alone, haunted, disbelieved. She thought about the nurse. She thought about the figure with no eyes. She could not unknow this. The curse was hers now. The shadows multiplied. Within a week, Chloe saw 3 more. An old man on the subway platform, a child in the pediatric ward during a follow-up appointment, a woman in the supermarket holding a bag of lemons. Each time, the same sequence, the translucent figure, the metallic screech, the sudden cold, the smell. God, the smell. It was decay, but not simple rot. It was formaldehyde and copper, antiseptic, trying to cover up something that had been dead too long. It clung to her throat. It made her gag. She started photographing again, desperate for proof, desperate to see if the camera would catch what her new eyes saw. It did. In every image, faint but undeniable, the figures appeared. Smudges of light where no light should be. Shapes that did not belong. She showed no one. Who would believe her? But there was something else. Something worse. The times were wrong. She would see a shadow at 3:15 in the afternoon, check her phone, and the screen would read 3:15. But the clock on the wall, the one in the kitchen, the digital display on the microwave, they all said 3:30. 15 minutes missing. 15 minutes she could not account for. It happened again and again. Time fractured around death. Time bent. And Chloe began to feel as though she were slipping through gaps in the world that should not exist. She found a transplant recipient support group meeting in a church basement. Fluorescent lights buzzing too loud. Folding chairs arranged in a circle. Coffee in styrofoam cups. Most of them talked about gratitude, about second chances, about the generosity of strangers who gave them life. But there were others. Quiet ones. The ones who spoke carefully, who glanced at each other with recognition. Chloe understood. A man named Daniel, heart transplant recipient, 10 years post-surgery. He said he had cravings now. Foods he had never liked before. Cigars he had never smoked. He said his personality had shifted. He said he felt like someone else was living inside his chest. A woman named Margaret, liver transplant, 8 years. She said she dreamed in another language, one she had never studied, but when she woke, she could not remember the words. She said she had memories of places she had never been. She said the doctors told her it was trauma, medication, her brain trying to process the enormity of what had happened to her body. She said she knew they were wrong. Chloe listened. She did not speak. Not yet. After the meeting, Daniel pulled her aside, his voice low, urgent. He told her there were others who had noticed stranger things. He told her about a forum, hidden, encrypted, where transplant recipients shared experiences no one else would believe. He told her about the Watchers. She went home, logged in, descended into threads that spiraled into paranoia and truth in equal measure. The stories were there. Dozens of them. Hundreds. Recipients who saw things, knew things, felt things that did not belong to them. And beneath it all, a pattern. The Watchers. Formally dressed, always with clipboards, always observing. Some people saw them at hospitals. Others in dreams. A few claimed they appeared at the moment of death, recording, measuring, never intervening. Chloe thought about the figure with no eyes. She thought about the nurse. She thought about the way time had fractured. Then she found the thread about the children. It started as speculation, then became something more concrete. Users comparing notes. All of them at some point in their childhood had been flagged. Pulled into rooms, questioned by people who were not teachers, tested in ways that felt wrong. They had been told they were gifted, special, brilliant. They had been asked about dreams, about intuition, about knowing things they should not know. And then, years later, they needed transplants. And then, after the transplants, they changed. Chloe sat back, the screen glowing in the dark. She remembered now. She had been tested too. She had been 10, maybe 11. A woman in a gray suit had sat across from her and asked strange questions. Do you ever know what someone's going to say before they say it? Do you dream about things that have not happened yet? Have you ever felt like you were somewhere else? Someone else? She had answered honestly. She had been a child. She had not known to lie. She searched Vera's name in the forum. Nothing. But she found something else. A thread, deleted now, cached only in fragments. The user had been researching organ donors, cross-referencing death records with childhood psych evaluations. The conclusion was insane, but the data was there. Donors who exhibited early precognitive traits, anomalies in perception, neurological irregularities, their organs were not random. They were selected. Their tissue carried something. Trauma-encoded memory. Neural pathways that should not exist. And when transplanted into recipients who had also been flagged as children, the transfer was not just biological. It was perceptual. It was psychological. It was intentional. Chloe felt cold. She felt watched. She looked up from her laptop and saw the figure standing in the corner of her apartment, hollow-eyed, waiting. She blinked. It was gone. But when she looked back at the screen, there was a new message in her inbox. From an account with no name, just a string of numbers. You see them now. They see you, too. Stop looking. She closed the laptop. She did not sleep that night. The dreams started 3 days later. She was Vera. She was standing in a factory, cold, metallic, the air thick with oil and rust. Her father was there, working the press, and she knew the cable was frayed, knew the pressure release was jammed, knew that in 30 seconds it would snap and crush him. She screamed. She ran. No one listened. No one ever listened. And then the sound, bone and metal, and the silence after. She woke, gasping, her hands clutching the sheets. The clock read 6:23 in the morning. The same time she had seen in another dream, another life, another reality that was bleeding into hers. She began to see them everywhere. The Watchers. At the grocery store, standing too still in the produce section, clipboard in hand. On the subway platform, observing the old man with a shadow. At the hospital during a follow-up appointment, in the hallway, writing, always writing. They never spoke to her. They never acknowledged her. But she felt their attention, clinical, detached, constant. One night, she followed one. He was tall, formal suit, and had a hat that looked decades out of place. He walked 3 blocks without turning, without hesitating, and entered a building with no sign, no name, just a door. She waited. She watched. 2 more Watchers arrived. Then 3. Then 5. All carrying clipboards. All silent. She did not go inside. She could not. Some part of her, the part that still remembered what it felt like to be sane, told her that if she crossed that threshold, she would not come back. But she dreamed about it. She dreamed she was inside, strapped to a chair, lights too bright, voices asking questions. How many do you see? When do you see them? Can you stop it? Can you change it? And in the dream, she heard Vera's voice. Thin, exhausted, broken. Blindness was mercy. You will understand. The subway station smelled like rust and urine, and something worse, something Chloe recognized now, the smell of imminent death. She was there because she had no choice, because she had seen the vision 3 nights in a row, because she knew what was coming and could not ignore it anymore. The shadows were everywhere. Dozens of them. Translucent, hollow-eyed, standing among the commuters who could not see them, who scrolled on their phones, who waited for trains that would not come. Chloe felt the cold sink into her bones. She heard the metallic screech, louder than it had ever been, drilling into her skull. The lights flickered. The air tasted like copper. And then she saw them. The Watchers. 4 of them standing on the platform, clipboards out, pens moving. Recording. Not warning. Not helping. Just watching. One of them, the man in the hat, looked directly at her. He did not smile. He did not frown. He simply noted her presence, wrote something down, and returned his attention to the crowd. Chloe looked up. The ceiling was wrong. She did not know how she knew, but she knew. Structural failure. The bolts were sheared. The concrete was cracked. It was going to collapse. It was going to collapse in minutes, maybe seconds, and no one knew but her. She opened her mouth. Nothing came out. The watchers were still writing, still observing. They knew too. They had always known. This was not intervention. This was data collection. She thought about Vera, screaming in the factory, ignored, dismissed, locked away. She thought about the nurse, the old man, the child, the woman with the lemons. She thought about every shadow she had seen, every death she had witnessed, every warning she had swallowed because no one would believe her. Not this time. She screamed. The sound tore out of her, raw, primal, louder than the metallic screech, louder than the rumble in the ceiling. People turned, startled, annoyed, confused. She pointed up, her voice breaking, cracking, desperate. Get out. Get out now. The ceiling is going to collapse. You have to move. Please, please get out. Some people laughed. Some rolled their eyes. But a few, just a few, looked up, saw the cracks, saw the dust falling, saw the way the bolts were bending. The first person ran. Then another. Then 10. Then 50. The watchers moved toward her, calm, measured, no urgency in their steps. The man in the hat spoke for the first time, his voice flat, clinical. You are compromising the observation. You need to stop. This is not your role. You were not meant to intervene. She did not stop. She screamed louder. She grabbed people, pulled them toward the exit, shoved them up the stairs. A mother with a child, frozen in fear, clutching a stroller. Chloe grabbed the stroller, pushed it toward the exit and turned back for the mother. The ceiling groaned. The watchers stepped back, still writing, still recording, their expressions unchanged. The mother ran. Chloe turned to follow. The ceiling came down. She woke in the hospital, blind. The debris had destroyed her corneas, the doctor said. Irreparable. No second transplant. No more sight. Just darkness. Permanent, final. But the shadows were gone. The metallic screech was gone. The cold was gone. The smell was gone. She could not see them anymore. She could not see anything anymore. The nurse, different from the one who had died, told her she had saved 43 people. 43 lives that would have been crushed, buried, lost. The ceiling had collapsed exactly where the crowd had been standing. Exactly where Chloe had warned them not to be. There was no mention of the watchers. No one had seen them. No security footage captured them. They were gone, as if they had never existed at all. Chloe sat in the darkness, her hands resting in her lap, and felt something she had not felt in months. Peace. She thought about Vera, about the curse, about the gift that was never a gift at all. She thought about the children who had been tested, flagged, engineered into something useful, something tragic. She thought about the watchers, and whether they had been real, or whether the curse had made her see them, given her an enemy she could fight when the real horror was the visions themselves. She did not know. She would never know. But she had used Vera's sight. She had saved lives. She had turned the curse into something good, something undeniable, something that mattered. And now it was over. A nurse asked if she wanted the television on, something to listen to. Chloe said no. She preferred the silence. But late that night, when the hospital was dark and still, she heard it. A metallic screech. Distant. Faint. Growing closer. She held her breath. She waited. It faded. She exhaled. Slow, steady, trying to convince herself it was nothing. Trauma echo. Auditory hallucination. The brain's refusal to let go. But deep down, beneath the relief, beneath the exhaustion, a question lingered. Had the curse been lifted because she was blind again? Or had it been lifted because she had finally done what Vera never could, screamed loud enough, acted fast enough, saved enough lives to satisfy whatever force had demanded a price? And if it was the latter, if the curse had a purpose, a quota, a design, did that mean the Watchers were not predators? Did that mean they were architects? She would never know. She did not want to know. Because some doors, once closed, should never be opened again. And some gifts, once returned, should never be reclaimed. Chloe Hartley had been given sight. She had inherited a curse. She had saved 43 people. And now, in the darkness, she was finally free. Or so she told herself. Because in the silence of her hospital room, she could still smell it, faint, almost imperceptible. Formaldehyde and copper. Antiseptic and decay. The smell of something waiting. We are told that seeing is believing. But what if sight reveals truths we were never meant to witness? What if blindness is not loss, but mercy? Vera Walsh saw death, and it destroyed her. Chloe Hartley inherited that sight, and it gave her one chance to rewrite the ending. But the Watchers are still out there, still observing, still recording. And the children who were tested, who were flagged, who were marked, they are still waiting for the call, the accident, the transplant that will change them forever. Some gifts are not given. They are passed down. And some curses do not end. They simply find new eyes to see through. If you found yourself holding your breath during this story, if you are still thinking about what the Watchers were, or whether Chloe truly escaped, leave a comment below. I want to hear your theories. And if you are watching this alone, in the dark, at 3 in the morning, maybe turn on a light. Just in case. Until next time, remember, not all gifts are blessings. And not all sight is freedom. Sleep well. Or try to.